More than 7,200 lawmakers from across the country and political spectrum are in Chicago for a major policy conference. Annalisa Burgos is there with the Hawaii delegation and has this report.
Aloha from Chicago. We just finished day one of the National Conference of State Legislatures here at McCormick Place. More than a dozen Hawaii lawmakers and legislative staff, as well as leaders from HICO, UH, and other organizations from Hawaii are here talking about big issues affecting the whole country, and they're learning best practices and sharing their practices with other lawmakers.
But the challenge now, of course, is...
Sessions tackled all sorts of topics, from affordability to energy and education to AI.
Great morning and aloha.
Several small meetings were held before the main conference, including the Environmental Caucus, which was led by State Senator Chris Lee.
So we read them from last year.
On Sunday, the National Asian Pacific American Caucus of State Legislators met to discuss AAPI representation and issues. That was chaired by Maui Senator Troy Hashimoto.
You don't want to be legislating in a bubble. You want to understand the context, and context matters. And so that's why when you talk to a lot of these different people, that's really what you're trying to understand.
Aloha, Senator Lynn Koi from Hawaii.
Almost a third of the AAPI caucus attendees were from Hawaii, reflecting the state's leadership and impact on other states.
Other states have very few Asians in their body, and they're a minority of the minority. So to be able to be part of this organization allows Hawaii to help other states with their Asian electeds and show them and share with them and really share ideas on what we're doing in Hawaii and see what sort of challenges they're facing, and hopefully they can overcome their challenges and help them throughout their advocacy in their state.
Discussions focused on engaging AAPI voters, promoting AAPI candidates, AI regulation, immigration enforcement, and health disparities in the AAPI community. Nonprofits also shared results of surveys and data showing issues AAPI communities care about. Affordability was at the top of the list.
Definitely here to learn about artificial intelligence and how that is going to impact our state. The issues of climate change, issues relating to the federal government and how its funding and programs affect us at the state level.
When asked about the recent indictments of their former colleague, Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke, lawmakers expressed disappointment and acknowledged the scandal's impact on public trust.
Honesty is incredibly, and transparency is incredibly important. And I think that's the saddest thing about this whole thing is I think that level of trust has been broken, and I think we as legislators have to rebuild that.
The conference runs through Wednesday, and while the sessions are really informative and interesting, lawmakers say that the real learning happens in the networking part and getting to know the lawmakers from across the country. Reporting in Chicago, Annalisa Burgos, Hawaii News Now.